It's kind of like ass backwards right now on Steam. Like you need to basically reach some level of escape velocity through external marketing, driving a ton of traffic and visibility to your page before you even get a shot from the platform, which is tremendously prohibitive to most game studios, by number. Most game studios don't have a large marketing budget. And so like walking that tightrope of like, when do you show it? How do you, like, when do you start getting feedback from real players, from the market, and figuring out if this thing has an audience is like tough and expensive and ambiguous. So yeah.
I think the venture model was very much, we're going to make 100 bets and one of them is going to pay for all the other 99 that failed, right? Some of that just has to do with the fact that like, that's how those funds are built, right? It's like, this is basically like we're raising a lot of rich people's money and this is their high risk investment category. So we want to go for high risk, high reward, right?
What's going on with marketing in game dev? Why aren't we able to get players to care about games anymore? What can you do to actually get seen with so many titles releasing? Video game marketing is in a tough state. It's not been pretty these last couple years. While some games find many players with little marketing, others might spend millions only to release to terribly low CCU and are quickly shut down as a result. Is it luck? Can you tip the odds in your favor? To dive into this, I've got Joe Blancato and Chris Heintz, and we're going to be talking about community and marketing in modern game dev. Chris, Joe, how are you both doing?
Doing great. Hey, Ben. Thanks for having us.
Doing great. Thank you for having us.
No, excited you're here. This has been one I've been looking forward to for a long time. Just we haven't had anybody talk about the marketing space from the expert perspective. Before we go in, I want to give you both just a quick intro. Whether you want to do it together or individually, that's up to you, but like, go for it. Who are you?
I'll start. I'm Chris. Chris Heintz. I'm one of the co-founders of Ignition Facility. Joe's my other co-founder. We're an agency that helps game studios bring their games to market. We're kind of, one way to think of us is we're like a publishing general contractor. Another way we like to talk about ourselves is that we agile modern games marketing. Another way is that we community, because that's how any of these games that do find audiences find it, by building incredible communities overall. So that's kind of our MO. We embed deeply with the clients we work with, and try to help them navigate this psychotic game market that we're in. I got my start in PR. I was at an agency, then I was at Riot for a long time, then I was at Amazon, and then I Voltroned up with Joe. And
and on my end, hi, I'm Joe. Got my start as a baby journalist way back when, then moved over into marketing, started at Cryptic Studios, launched Champions Online, Star Trek Online, moved over to Riot, was there for about 5 years doing a mix of marketing and dev management and that type of thing. And then from there, like when Chris went to Amazon, he actually left the same day I did. We both left Riot at the same time. I went to a small event producer, helped grow that, kind of saw what that was like from the inside. And then we teamed up, it was 2018, I think. And kind of started on this journey now. So we've been kind of at it now for, I guess, 6 years.
Dang, that's awesome. Okay, so first question I always ask, if the guests are open to it, what's your take on the games industry today?
Oh.
I like to start with the small ones, the little bite size.
Yeah, sure. I think like in a sentence, like it's pretty rough out there right now. I think, before whatever apocalypse that we're going through right now when it comes to jobs and stuff like that, it was already kind of difficult, I think, just to get a game out the door. And, now that we're kind of seeing, and you can diagnose this any way you want. Is it the end of free money? Is it, like the AI bubble, like what's going on that's causing all these jobs to kind of evaporate? But it's like bleak isn't exactly the right word, but it's definitely like, I haven't seen it this bad since like 2008. It's probably the best way to describe it. And what's different between 2008 is it was everybody. It wasn't just tech, but it seems like now, thankfully, or thankfully for the wider economy, maybe not for us, is it seems pretty localized right now to just like the technical side of things. My hope, and like this is, I think, probably a little naive at this stage, is that we see a lot of smaller studios kind of coming and rising from the ashes. Smaller kind of AA size, like Larian, pre Baldur's Gate, maybe a little smaller than that, but just kind of like seeing this some creativity kind of rise out of the destruction. So you're not so locked into the AAA sequelitis, Marvel Cinematic Universe, machine. And we start seeing more just new stuff coming out. But I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, there's the convergence of a few trends that I think are causing a lot of uncertainty, ambiguity, fog of war, etc. One is is happening to all media, and it's happening to games now, but it already happened to music. It's already happening to film and TV. Every form of media is getting nicheified, is getting democratized, is like the fun platform holder word for it. But effectively, like because of technology, because of the internet, like there's this tendency towards making it easier to make stuff. And for games, that's becoming true in a lot of ways, both because of the accessibility and availability of game engines, but also a ton of different like tools and tech that are now off the shelf. Like everybody and their mom is starting a SaaS company to do some specific thing for game studios. There's a million of those. Pick your pragma, right? And then that's not even to mention Roblox, UEFN, one of a million other UGC platforms that are trying to make it WYSIWYG to build games, right? Make it possible. And the thing is, some of these hits, Lethal Company, as probably the prime example, are coming out of that ecosystem now. And they've crossed the bridge. They've taken an off-ramp off of Roblox, and they're starting to make stuff that's sold on the same marketplaces as the same games that are being sold by Sony. Concord is competing with Lethal Company, and like the economics are just completely at odds. They're completely different. The audience expectations are completely different, right? The newer generation of players who grew up on Minecraft and Roblox are coming into an environment with different expectations about quality and about what they want. Also different attention span. So and on top of all that, we're dealing with these platforms. Again, this is why it's the same with all content. Platforms that are basically algorithms that try to match audiences with content, right? And they use a variety of means to do that. But like the most obvious one is the TikTok style of, hey, you're going to post content. We're going to show it to a few people, see if they like it. Do they watch it? Do they watch more? Do they comment? Do they engage? Do they follow you? Okay, cool. We'll show it to more people. That's essentially what's happening with all platforms online. Platforms for game discovery and sales like Steam, app stores, etc. But also the platforms for like games, for marketing or building community. So, TikTok and YouTube and all these things. Becoming increasingly hard to like navigate these algorithms, and the algorithms are basically trying to find these niche audiences. In one sense, that's kind of matched to the new mode where like you can, because of technology, you can do a lot more with a smaller team. And so smaller studios, to Joe's point, rising from the ashes and building like small experiences and being more experimental and going to market quicker, like is actually matched very well with that new reality where like go talk to players, go get signal, go figure out if your content actually appeals to an audience, and then follow that audience until you have product market fit and you have a game that's successful. What the limit to that success is maybe a lot smaller. I don't know if we're in a space where you can have another League of Legends or another Fortnite, at least currently, maybe in the future. Yeah. Anyway, that's my TED talk on it.
You're going into red ocean for sure. Or almost wherever you're going right now, and I like how you described it as the nicheification. One of the things, like my product pitch that I don't actually have a product for, so it's not going to go anywhere. But it's what Pandora and Spotify did for music was say that like, well, look, there's just a million people out there making songs. There's more songs than there have ever been, but as you said, the democratization of this doesn't actually mean there's more successful people. In fact, almost the opposite, because you end up with like a smaller and smaller percentage of those people that actually get any attention. And Pandora comes along and says like, hey, I can solve that problem for you. I'll just cycle stuff through, and people hit like, I'll show it to more people, and then it'll keep going. The problem is the way you consume music is very different from how you consume games. Like you can't, it would change how we made games. Because if I make a game that you can try in like 3 minutes and then either hit yes, I want to play another 3 minutes, or no, I want to go to the next one. That's a completely different game than the experiences we have today, where you're going to spend 20 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, 5 hours before you even understand it. I mean, you get something like EU4, and there's people that are like, hey, if you haven't played your first 2,000 hours, like you haven't started yet, and it's like, okay, cool. Well, discoverability now becomes a huge problem, and we can't solve it. I don't know what the analog is, or if there is an analog for Spotify and Pandora, that's not, as you said, a platform-based thing, like a Roblox sort of attempting to match content to audience. So anyway, yeah, I think it's a very tough spot, and the whole thing is shifted.
And even Steam is heading this direction. They teased a new feature that they're calling Trailer TV with no details, but like kind of this, it's going to be debuted or demoed or tested during Next Fest in October. And so 2024, I don't know when it's out. And it'll be interesting to see what it is. And if it's, is that basically a TikTok style algorithm for showing like games to players and helping to improve the way they match audiences with players? Because it's kind of like ass backwards right now on Steam. Like you need to basically reach some level of escape velocity through external marketing, driving a ton of traffic and visibility to your page before you even get a shot from the platform, which is tremendously prohibitive to most game studios. By number, most game studios don't have a large marketing budget, and games, because of the nature of them, you do kind of have to, depending on the game and the expectations of the audience, kind of have to build them over a long period of time until they're marketable. And so like walking that tightrope of like, when do you show it? When do you start getting feedback from real players from the market and figuring out if this thing has an audience is like tough and expensive and ambiguous. So, yeah.
So getting into some of the marketing and the community side, because again, I love how you both have always kind of talked about those two things as very linked, the community and the marketing. What's happening in game dev marketing specifically, as we do see, some unexpected successes, like your Lethal Companies, or like I played a ton of BattleBit Remastered a while ago, and it's just like it's another one that sort of peeled out and just became its own thing. And just so we date this, we're mid-September right now. Like Concord has launched, been not had players come to it, and has been shut down. What's going on?
It's tough to answer. It's actually it's a big question, right? Because I think what's interesting is from a game's ability to be successful, however you want to describe that, there's a lot of things that can fall over before it can actually happen. And so one of those, obviously, is the product side of things, right? Like, is this the game for right now? Is it resonant? Like, is it doing something that either you guessed right and said, or you hypothesized correctly or developed correctly to get to the right answer of like, what do people want right now, right? And some games can just basically sell themselves in that type of environment, right? Like they've got the right recipe of gameplay, shareability, goal setting, just things that get you to go and tell 5 friends, oh my God, you've got to play this. Like we saw that with League. I think you kind of see it in a lot of these games that are what we would kind of call like a viral breakout or something like that, where basically the result grossly outpaces the development budget, the marketing budget, everything else. So there's definitely there's a product fit question there. And I think the other side is on the marketing front is like, I think, Chris, jump in here if I'm talking crazy stuff, but like the way I kind of look at it is there's kind of like a series of things that have to go into a general marketing plan, right? So you have to, but nowadays it's thinking about creators, thinking about community, thinking about social and content marketing, just kind of things like that. Also just thinking even broadly about price and where does this fit on what platform, what type of biz dev do you need to do? Can you get Sony to pick up the phone? Like all that stuff. Knowing exactly what works for each game is not something that I can't tell you. I can't be like, oh, Concord just should have done this, right? Or if I'm the marketing director at Concord, this is exactly what I would have done. It's more about kind of figuring that out, in an agile way over time. So when you're kind of at that gestational phase, like you're still finding the fun, or maybe you've got to that point where you start going into production. It's like, we've got the core loop here. Let's start adding some content. That's about, I think, at the stage where you can start experimenting with stuff. Does this do well on the social media platforms? And if so, which ones and why, right? Or is this more of a community play where it's like, holy shit, we've got 10,000 people in Discord. Like, how do we get that into 100,000? How do we get that community riled up so they're sharing and being an engine of growth, right? Can also be traditional stuff. Like sometimes you just got the right formula and Reddit ads, your CPC is rock bottom, your cost per wish list is nothing. Buy your way into the algorithm, right? There's a million ways to do this, right? But I think the big thing is like, and Ben, I'm pretty sure like you beat this drum a lot, is any time when the closer you are to release, if that's when you're starting to prove your hypothesis, that's when you're in trouble, right? So our big thing is like, hey, let's go save you a couple $1 million. Let's figure this stuff out, figure out what works when it's cheap and non-necessarily repeatable. So when it's time to start pouring money into it, because unfortunately most marketing activity costs money, right? Let's make sure it's going to the right stuff. And so, it could be any one of those things, right? It could be like, oh man, like we're like creators just love what we're doing. So let's go talk to them. Let's go get a bunch of earned, which means you don't pay for it, earned media from them. Have them stream it like crazy, right? Huge win that way. But if you're not talking to creators as soon as possible, and establishing those relationships and getting feedback from them, like you're kind of just you're just kind of making it so you're delaying your bet closer to when you can actually recover.
Yeah. Well, there's such a difference. And sorry, Chris, I'll let you go in a second. I was just thinking about Spectre Divide with Shroud, and that connection. Many streamers will accept money and they'll play your game for a few days, but most of them won't keep playing it. And I think what you're talking about is like if creators are away, like Twitch streamers or whatever, if they're away, then like maybe you could actually get them really excited about the game by, again, engaging with them before the last minute, where they're just like, yeah, sure, you can hand me a paycheck, I'll play your game for a few days, I win, I really don't care about your game, versus like, oh, I feel actually invested in this product, I've been helping you like work on it and giving you feedback, and you've been thinking about me and creators and these sorts of things while you've been developing it, and I appreciate that. Like, it's there's a relational component there, that is an opportunity that I think, again, Spectre Divide like really leaned into. Again, I don't know exactly how well it worked, but like the game has more players than Concord, right? Like, and that's pretty much on the back of that kind of strategy. So anyway, Chris.
100%. Yeah. So the creator ecosystem it's the same thing I'm talking about the atomization and nichification. Like what the gatekeepers of what was cool, the tastemakers, used to be generally the media, right? IGN, still kind of matters, but like not as much as they used to in the same way they used to. And every day there's a new outlet that closed their doors. Today, Touch Arcade, which was like the kind of core mobile gaming editorial outlet, went bye-bye after like 15 years or something. And so Game Informer, was it? Or maybe they're still around. One of them shut down recently. And like that has evolved into a much more splintered ecosystem of content creators that are not bound by the same kind of ethical codes of journalists, which, despite what some people would tell you, are actually like true. Like there is a division between the advertising side of the business and the editorial side at any real media outlet. Now it's much more blurry, and it's understandably blurry because these content creators are largely outside of the it's a winner take all ecosystem there too, in terms of the lion's share of revenue, of brand money, of viewers goes to a handful of content creators. And then there's like tens of thousands of small ones who are doing it as a hobby. Maybe they want to go full time, or maybe they are earning some income out of it. And that ecosystem is becoming increasingly commodified. When did Valorant? No, was it Valorant or was it Apex? Both of those are good examples. I think Valorant's the one I'm thinking of, where they like launched with Twitch drops, right? From my perspective as an external observer, it looked like they ran the playbook. They kind of went, we've got this hero shooter. Overwatch, and I understand the strategy. Overwatch was faltering. It wasn't really another kind of hero shooter that was emerging and taking that crown. That's a huge market opportunity. If you just look at like the shooter ecosystem, like theoretically, a game could come in, go viral, be incredibly sticky, and earn its way to like this massive 10 million player kind of engine for one of these publishers. That's a bet I'd take. Challenge is like, what is the distribution? How are you going to reach those? How are you going to get the top of funnel to work? And it's not new IP with characters that nobody already has an attachment to, and it's not just run a trailer at the TGAs and do first party kind of showcases and market to press and spend on creators. They certainly did. They did all of that, and then they peaked at like 2,000 CCU or 600 or whatever. It was not. Yeah. and it's not at any fault of like the team. Certainly everybody could armchair quarterback it and say bad product strategy, blah blah blah, and I'll do that too. But like ultimately, like there's no crystal ball. That said, like I think if you don't have some sort of distribution advantage, some avenue to get your game in front of people, you are screwed essentially. So for any game studio, regardless of size, whether you're a AAA spending hundreds of millions of dollars on a AAA IP, a live service play, or you're an indie studio or a solo dev, even, like you need to be thinking about how is this game, what is the unique advantage that's going to help this game find an audience? And the answer is going to be different for everybody. It's going to depend on your strengths as a team and as a product, as an IP. One distribution advantage could be IP. So if we're thinking about hero shooters, I'd put my money on Marvel, the NetEase one. Is it NetEase? Marvel Rivals? I think it's NetEase. As having more potential, certainly because people have an attachment to the IP. And that is a distribution advantage. That you've done the brand marketing already over decades of Marvel, right? And so if you don't have that, if you're trying to do the new IP thing, that is the work you're cutting out for yourself. If you're trying to create a new IP, and you're trying to recoup hundreds of millions of dollars of game investment, like you're talking about building an IP and a brand that has to compete with established brands. And it's not just the Marvels. That's like an extreme example. It's also like League of Legends and Fortnite and like just pure game IPs that have been around for decades are incredibly sticky. The incumbents, and you are going to have a real tough time reaching them in terms of feature parity, in terms of IP resonance, all of those things. So it's just it's a really tough uphill battle at that scale in particular.
Yeah, no, I think about things like that, World of Tanks, right? Destiny, Warframe. These are great games. Tons of people play them. I think Destiny got to lean on the fact that it was Bungie. Yeah. The others grew slowly.
Well, look at Marathon.
Over a very long period of time. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
that's fair. Yeah.
And no. To be fair, like Bungie of when Destiny came, IP, the brand was a little
10 years ago. It was different. Yeah.
They had a little more juice at the time, for sure.
Well,
yeah.
I think that actually points to the evolution of the industry as well, and that there's so much to dig into about what you guys were just kind of covering. And when I'm looking at it, it's interesting you mentioned the word agile, because the thing I've always said is like I always feel like game dev is 10 to 15 years behind cutting edge, and so by the time they start adapting modern software development practice, which actually has high applicability into game development, we've already gotten to the point where people have productized it and it's become something we're cynical about. And so it's like has a lot more trouble getting into games. And I feel like there's almost a similar thing here where like the market is evolving. And I made the same thing you did, which is like, hey, we can all armchair quarterback Concord. We can all make our guesses. Oh, they should have been free to play. It should have been. They should have done. And it's always like, yeah, human brains desperately seek coherence. And so we look for it when we're like, well, that didn't go the way we expected it to. What's the thing that creates coherence around this? Then I find it. And then I'm like, well, that must be it. And you're wrong, probably more than you're right. But it gives your brain a little bit of like, I solved the uncertainty in the world today. And so I can move on to the next thing. But I'm struck because I do feel like this pattern has been emerging, and you do have these interesting exceptions to it. Like Elden Ring, I would say, was an unexpected hit. And there's a lot that goes into that, but like Souls games were always very niche. And so like I played Elden Ring. I don't like Souls games, but like my friends, to your point, the virality of it, like I hopped in and I ran around and I beat 2 bosses or something. Like, but I wasn't offended. I wasn't offended by the fact, Baldur's Gate, another fantastic example.
I think what's kind of interesting on those two is like, I think for Elden Ring, I think that actually kind of plays into a little bit of what I think Chris, you had talked about earlier on, which is kind of like start early, right? So it's interesting because Elden Ring is technically a new IP, but I think the IP really is from, right? And they've had 5-6 games, all of which were back the hardcore community might differ with me, right? But I think they each got better over time, right? And I think what Elden Ring did is they tuned the difficulty just a little bit. They brought in George R. R. Martin for a little bit of some brand help, right? Or a little bit like pop culture infusion, so to speak, right? Gameplay was a little softer, right? But they also had this huge, massive, expansive world, right? So It's one of those things where it's like, if this is your thing, more is more, and you just got a lot of it, right? And the fact that it's one of those games that videos extremely well. It's very clear to understand what's going on. I mean, you can't really say that about a MOBA or a lot of other games, right? But like, there's a dude swinging a giant sword at another dude, and the other dude falls over, right? It's like, cool, I get how this works. And it was gorgeous, right? So you kind of had like this almost anime-esque aesthetic on top of really visible or very clear gameplay, or really very clear outcomes to gameplay, with something that is challenging, and that brings in the hardcore crowd. And those are the groups, or those are the people that tell all their friends, you got to come play this thing, right? So I think for that, it was almost like this apotheosis of like, we built and built and built, and then finally, not even finally, but it's just like, this was that moment, and they captured the inflection point really well, did a lot of things executionally well to take it from that niche into something that was much more of an early mainstream hit, or now at this point, just mainstream hit, right?
So you also mentioned Baldur's Gate 3 in there, because I think that, and that's another, there it's interesting, because for me, I view them and the way that they did early access was just brilliant. And obviously they were building on, in some sense, like it's a similar kind of story. Again, new IP, Dungeons and Dragons versus Divinity Original Sin, which was more based on D&D, not like as direct. But they had something, they knew it worked, and then they just made it really big and really good, and they had that leg up because they'd built some previous stuff. But they also, like the early access strategy, I mean, that game was in early access for how long? Like 3 or 4 years?
Yeah. And you can't really do that anymore either, right? Early access is pretty tarnished. It's still certainly a fit for some games. I think unless like look at Stormgate. I don't know if anybody followed Stormgate, but their early access launch.
Yeah, I gave a try to the campaign. It was a little rough right now.
And I understand, like it's hard. RTS is a particularly difficult genre. It's a super difficult genre from a publishing and funding perspective.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
It's honestly similar to CRPGs in the sense that I think a lot of people wrote it off as like, oh, that's old. The audience has aged out of this. It's no longer a fit. Nobody's gonna.
Yeah.
For
MOBA
RTS,
Tower Defense ate it, right?
Yeah.
That's it. It's gone.
And for CRPGs, it's like, well, no, like people want real time. They want Bethesda style kind of hybrid, at least. They don't want this nerdy turn-based shit. And it's like, no, they actually really do. If you do it well, and if you this is the other advantage, like from and Larian, decades building and refining and having a team. I mean, this is a production and like a company and a business thing more than it is a marketing thing. They just refine their craft, but they also built IP and brand for the company, for the games themselves. And like, that's incredible. That's an incredible distribution advantage. And for most studios, you are never going to have that. You can have that 10 years down the road for game 4, if you find an audience and find a small success with game 1, or knock it out of the park, get lucky. I mean, I don't think it's entirely luck, but like, actually, really quick, it's even Lethal Company. Like that kid built like, I don't know how old he is, but I think he's a kid, built like 20 games in Roblox or something like that, and then built a couple in Steam that failed, and then made Lethal Company. And so it's a different scope, different scale of project and team, but it's the same principle of refining your craft, building an audience over time, taking shots on goal. And that is next to impossible for studios of above a certain size, like where you're burning how much a year, right? Like 10 million a year for a small to mid-sized studio. Like you don't have the luxury. The money is not free anymore. Like Joe mentioned earlier, money costs money now, and the COVID kind of overinvestment bump kind of burned a lot of people out, and so we're in this weird lull where there's there's kind of an underinvestment in IP, which theoretically in a couple of years you might see a bluer ocean where more games have a shot to actually find an audience, but I wouldn't count on it because the endemic trends around democratization or like tooling, being like accessibility, lower barriers to entry, those are only going to accelerate. And so like like any studio, I would be like, get your shit to market ASAP. And to market doesn't necessarily mean launch it, take money from customers, but like get it in front of, like expose your plan to the enemy, to light of day. and see what you get back. I think Ryan Rigney called it like signal in one of his recent posts, and I've been adopting that too because it's like absolutely a great way to encapsulate it. But like it's in such a cacophonous environment where you have these algorithms basically decide that you have no insight into. They're all black boxes on various platforms, social media platforms, content platforms, Steam, whatever. You have very little insight into those things, and it's outside of your control as a marketer or a game studio, right? As studio head, whatever. And so like the only thing you can really do is actually just test, is put stuff out there. In fact, this is a pretty common practice in mobile, and there are Steam publishers, the name escapes me. There's one that does this specifically as a strategy, and I think Steam doesn't like it, or Valve doesn't like it, but too bad. Where they literally will like make a trailer, make some screenshots for a game that doesn't exist. They'll mock it up, they'll do a prototype, they'll get, and then they will test it on Steam and they'll advertise against it and then see what comes back in terms of wishlist conversion, in terms of community interest, all the signals they look at, and then they'll actually make the games that perform. That is the extreme version.
Yeah, but that's smart. That's smart in the modern world. Like, is there interest, right? I'm always checking. Is there interest in what I'm building?
It's smart, but it kind of removes like the creative, like designer element, which I think a lot of studio heads, like it is to some extent an art form, whether you want to call it that or not. And like and you do need like incredible designers to make games great. And you can't just like, throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. But there's some hybrid of that strategy where it's like, okay, you have an idea, you have a hypothesis. We're going to make a game that's a looter shooter with this IP and this, whatever twist. Oh, it's roguelite or whatever. Get it in front of real players that are representative of your target audience, who you think your target audience is, as soon as humanly possible, and see what they say. And that is the way to like actually de-risk what you're working on. Is to Joe's point of like save a couple million, or if you're a big studio, a couple $100 million down the line by de-risking and actually like getting feedback early. And I think a lot of like big marketing departments at like AAA publishers, et cetera, would probably say, oh, we do that. We do like market research and we have this sophisticated data science team. And like, like all of that stuff is with merit. But like for most studios don't have those resources, and you're going to have a incredible lack of certainty. And the only thing you can really do is just, again, expose it to the light of day and see what happens, see what comes back. And then.
Yeah, there's also like, how stuck are you on your plan, right? I Battlefield 2042 was a very interesting example of, you did a closed beta and players were like, this needs a lot of work. But you were using the closed beta as a marketing tool and a technical test, right? Can our servers hold up? How many servers are we going to need? And the marketing. And when you then launch the game with very little different from the closed beta, including all the bugs that the players found and were laughing about on Reddit for months prior, like, and now you drop the game, it's like, hey, were you paying attention? Were you listening to us? And I think that the plan I think there's two things here that come to mind for me. One is the plan and getting stuck on it. Like, hey, this is the plan, we're just going to execute it through launch day. And the other is, the way I would describe what you were just talking about, Chris, is you have assumptions. Check your assumptions as soon as you possibly can.
Yeah, and sure. Like, I think you really hit the nail on the head with the Battlefield beta issue, right? It was, were you listening, right? And I think it dovetails into falling in love with the plan, or maybe it's just like that's a big boat, so it turns really slow. Like, I envy their budgets, but I also don't envy having to make a change, after 30 levels of approval have agreed upon it, That said, you can turn something like that into a win if you acknowledge the fact that you screwed up, right? Or this, it's like, hey, like I really don't know how EA tests their product market fit and like the quality of all that stuff. I don't know, right? I think though that in that moment, where you have to go is you have to eat the crow and then say how you're going to make it better. Then you have to go make it better, right? And you can actually turn something like that where it's like, oh man, like that's not great, into something where it's like, holy shit, EA finally listened, right? Like DICE is on this, right? Where like, it's a great way to actually kind of like re-earn trust, especially at a studio that doesn't, or a publisher that doesn't really traffic in a lot of trust historically. And so I think I look at that as one of those situations where it's like, okay, like some of that is might be actually a DNA thing, right? Because I'm like, okay, how would, what would Nintendo do in that situation? There's no way that game comes out comes out in that state. What would Riot do? Riot would absolutely not. Well, okay, I think even to today, as big as the company has gotten, as much as it's changed, there's no way that game would come out the door that way, right? But at certain times, it's like, hey, I'm not writing those checks. Things have got to line up. There's Game Awards coming out. It's a holiday season. There's a lot of ways to lose as much money delaying in that situation, because you're talking at that point, these are economies of GDPs, right? We're not talking oh, it's me and some friends, and maybe we someone gave us $15 million to go get our first game out the door. This is our marketing budget is 10 times that, right? Let alone the development budget and everything else. So, I just to kind of bring it back, just to bring that back around, right? Is to just echo your original point, which is you can't fall in love with a plan, especially if you're small. That's actually an advantage you have over an EA or something like that, is if you get data that says whatever you're doing isn't working, change what you're doing, and the earlier you can do that in your development process, I think the better off the game's going to be in the long term.
I can't remember, it might already be in a different podcast, but I was talking to somebody and they said there was a small studio of 5 people and a few founders, and they were moving towards production, and they all looked around and they were like, none of us like the game we're making and none of us think it's any good. And they just okay, we'll shut down the company. And that's a hard call. But at some level, I think there's a lot of respect for fair enough, and by the way, you guys have done co-founders. It's hard. Everybody's got a different opinion and you got to be able to work that through. And as you go down, and especially if you're all working on something that nobody's really excited about, I can imagine that being really hard on those relationships, and just okay, sorry to the contractors we hired, or sorry to the people that were co-deving with us or whatever, we're done. This isn't going to work. But, perhaps the most money-saving choice you could make. This ties into something else. Again, I'm keep going to other media streams, but Chris, you started it, so I'm rolling. Movies are very interesting. I was trying to look up at one point when I was looking into hey, how successful are games? And as far as I can tell, it's 5% or less of games that enter production make a profit, make any money at all. And that's those that make it to the production phase. So past prototype, if you go back. Someone describes it you got sort of a 1% chance of getting out of prototype, and you got a 1% chance of making it to production, then you got a 1% chance of actually making profit if you get through production. I'm yeah, in a horrible way, that's probably not that wrong. But movies are very interesting. It's a very different skew for them. And it seems to, and someone in the film industry might you totally got it wrong, but I'm just going to give you the broad that I saw in a study, which was about half of the movies make money and about half don't. And the advantage is you can only lose as much money as you spent, but you can gain much more. So we're net positive if we have enough hits, right? Because I can make back 6x my budget if this goes off really well, but I can only lose 1x my budget, right? If I look at it in total. And one of the things that movies have as an advantage is that we constantly need more of them. We want to be going to theaters. We enjoy this type of entertainment. Where games, when World of Warcraft comes out, it's not well, cool, what are we going to play next month? It's World of Warcraft. What are we going to play next year? World of Warcraft. What are we going to play 5 years from now? World of Warcraft. We're going to keep playing World of Warcraft. And as much as I didn't do that, because I hate leveling, but there was something that were that game's still alive. And we are now 20 years later. And so the market for games becomes more and more and more crowded, especially as going back before World of Warcraft, when everybody wasn't on the internet, you didn't patch things. So games just naturally decayed to the point where because you could take something that came out in 1995, an old LucasArts game or something like that, and if that thing had been continually patched ever since, it would look like a modern game today. It could, right? If you were doing that work. And people are now doing that work. League of Legends has gone through multiple big updates. World of Warcraft has so many of these games. And I think about this, and it's the space is super crowded, but the bet size is gigantic. And all of this to kind of get to this idea, with movies, you put a lot of money down, and then you hope you're in that higher 50%. You hope you're on the top, the top of it, right? You got your 10x or big returns. One of the things that I speculate about in today's market is that a VC, maybe publishers, but I think especially VCs, are more interested in like the 0.1% chance at the 10,000x return than they are in the 1% chance of the 1,000x return, right? Like in both cases, you're going for 10x or something, but it's like, I want it bigger, I want it more, I want it. And I've seen this in a lot of the startups that spun out of the last 4 or 5 years, where when you look at, I don't think it's anything malicious on anybody's part, but they're just like, yeah, hire more people, make it bigger, make it more, make it. And I think it was Richard Henkel who I was talking to. He said something to the effect of like, you get to this place where if you're not the biggest game of the year, even if you're like in the top 5, you failed because you have not recouped the loss of having that giant development team and needing the game to be, and there's only one biggest game of the year. And
it's not going to be,
I don't think, yeah, it's probably not going to be in
League
the
of Legends.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's going to be Fortnite. It's going to be something like that.
I understand I'm sorry, Joe. I'll go really quick, or as quick as I can. I understand the motivation from venture capitalists, from publishers. Like movies are a, by their nature, time box kind of experience. Now, big movies can do, $1 billion box office or whatever. Big games do tens of billions of dollars and they last forever, right? Like League, Fortnite, whatever. Or they're more similar to. And I understand why venture gets involved is because they look more similar. They're this hybrid between entertainment and software scales in a certain way. And if you have a sticky game that is a live service game, like then it can be that the potential returns are much higher. The initial upfront investment is much higher as well. The risks are much higher. What I think maybe wasn't predicted, and I think a lot of people were operating on kind of faulty assumptions, was that there was kind of unlimited room in the market for these kinds of games, or not. I don't think anybody thought there was unlimited room, but that you would see these kind of aging incumbents start to kind of take a dive, and that's probably true to some extent. But there's only so much room for these forever games, and I'm not by any stretch the first person to say that. So I think like that's the nature of when the capital sees games businesses, that's the kind of business they want to invest in. There's other kinds of games businesses that are investable in a different way that's more aligned with the publishing model or bootstrapping it and getting to revenue quick or crowdfunding. But yeah, anyway, sorry, Joe.
No, I mean, I think realistically, if you just like, I think the venture model is very much, we're going to make 100 bets and one of them is going to pay for all the other 99 that failed, right? Some of that just has to do with the fact that like, that's how those funds are built, right? It's like, this is basically like, we're raising a lot of rich people's money and this is their high risk investment category. So we want to go for high risk, high reward. Right. And I think, yeah, like it was easy to fall in love with like some of these platform level growth experience, like the games that kind of grew like a platform would, right? Like League was like that. Roblox is a platform. It grew like that. And to kind of echo Chris's point and also kind of back to yours is there's only so much time in a day, in a lifetime. Right. And like, if your friends are all playing World of Warcraft and that's been your thing for the last 5 years, it's going to be really hard to unseat somebody out of that pattern, right? And also, but then also with movies too, is like the reason we always need more is because it's a 3-hour morsel, right? It's like $15-20 to get in and you don't expect anything more out of that. I think games have kind of reached this point where like gamers, like myself included, want a much lower cost per hour for the price, right? So I'll spend $70 or $60 on Crusader Kings 3, right? And I'm gonna go play that. I'm gonna play that for 100 hours before I even understand it, right? Well, that's 100 hours. I'm not playing somebody else's game, right? And like when you start kind of looking at it that way, I think really the type of investment that we're gonna need to see is more of like a publisher model, kind of more of like an old school patron style model where it's like, yeah, I like what you're doing. I like the products you make. I'm gonna get in on this in some way. But I don't need a 1,000x return or 100x return. I just need you to beat the market, right? Kind of more of like almost like a PE type play without the ghoulishness. You know what I mean?
No, I think publishers actually, in some sense, some of the smaller, like what do you want to call them, indie style publishers, Hooded Horse with Manor Lords, and they've actually had a couple others that are like, hey, we hit like 100,000 people played this. Like that's pretty good. That made us some money. And you look at that, and again, this sort of the scale of the AAAs is just so huge now that it's when you look at it, it's like, well, it's not at all surprising that each of these has some version, except for Ubisoft, or I think theirs is harder. Each of them has some version of the golden goose. And as long as it keeps laying eggs, we're okay. You know, like you got your Call of Duty, you got your World of Warcraft, you got your League of Legends, you got your Fortnite. Like World of Tanks, right? As long as I think EA, you know, Sims and sports franchises, like, hey, as long as these exist, we keep making sequels, we keep making, like, people are gonna keep buying them, and that's what we do now, right? This is how we make our money, and then we play on the edges with new IPs. We try things. We see if we can get something else going, because we do know that, yeah, maybe eventually some of this will decay. And but I also see those bets just being so huge and so hard to recoup, like from an investment perspective, where even highly successful, critically acclaimed games, it's like, well, studio shut down. You know, there's been a lot of that recently.
Yeah. How do you know if your game is going to be sticky enough to actually become a sustainable live service business, if that's the market you're playing in? And like, even with all of the advantages, even if you have a big IP, even if you have a big platform, even if you have a big marketing budget to start the engine, there's no way to test retentiveness. And like, all of the mobile studios have this challenge. Mobile's a lot easier, right? Because the UA kind of thing is obviously becoming harder now because of IDFA and other changes, but historically, and I think it still sustains because of the nature of the mobile business. It is way more of a mature business in a lot of ways. Attribution's a lot easier. The marketing teams are a lot more sophisticated than we are on like the core side, and they still don't have the solution to like, how do you know? Like, look at Supercell. Supercell has tried, and they haven't like had that success in like 10 years of like, oh yeah, this is another forever game. It's another, you know, Clash of Clans level hit, because you cannot de-risk that outcome, because the only N that's big enough to actually test a game's kind of long tail retentiveness over like months and years is like a billion players or whatever, like 100 million players, like whatever the target.
No, it's a region, right? Like it's a huge. You have to go fully live. You have to see what happens.
Totally, and like, that's not a test anymore. That's called launching your video game, and it's you know, and that's true on like the core side as well, and that's Concord. That's, you know, and name your example of games. One of the other challenges is also just like shifting expectations of players, and like a lot of they're very slow moving ships, like Joe said, and like these decisions on these games were made a decade ago in some cases, right? And it takes that long to build a lot of these games, and like by the time you actually meet the market, that market is aged out or changed, or fundamentally like the assumptions that you had, because you have no way to predict the future like this, don't come true. So I don't know. I don't have a solution to the if you have a 5+ year development time horizon and a AAA level kind of budget for development and marketing, like good luck, Godspeed. Some of them will succeed, mostly because they look something like Elden Ring, right? Or they look something like Baldur's Gate, where there's like a history. There's a team.
GTA 6, right? GTA 6, huge. Probably gonna have. I mean, I've heard wild numbers in the billions of dollars for budget.
Totally.
I have no idea
100%.
if that's real or not, but like, if it is, it's like, yeah, but you know, GTA 6, I could see it if Rockstar does it even as good as they did the last couple.
And
they can make it back.
That's the kind of game that even if it steps on a rake at launch in some way, and it probably will, it could recover, because it's like a sunk cost fallacy to some extent. They're going to spend money until that thing is a business, right?
Right.
And or they go out of business, which I don't see happening either. And it's going to make so much money at retail launch that it's going to fund the next 10 years of development, if not more.
Exactly.
Maybe I'm exaggerating. These are numbers out of my hat, but yeah. So I don't know. Yeah. It's tough. But yeah, GTA 6 is the most extreme example of winner take all, like top 0.1% of games, and like there's a lot in the middle that are making similar, that are competing for a similar audience and making similar kind of live service bets, and doing it with way less resources, way less brand equity, way less kind of distribution advantage, and it's tough. It's really hard.
Okay, here's a quick recap of what we were just talking about. First, it's becoming easier and easier to make games, and that has some serious advantages, but it's impacting the market and game dev in a ton of ways. It's also adjusting player expectations and desires. Second, The ecosystem is changing. Discovery algorithms on platforms like Roblox and Steam are playing an ever-growing role in determining if anyone even knows your game exists. Meanwhile, traditional media like IGN and other review sites, while still somewhat relevant, are no longer the tastemakers they used to be. That could be in the hands of influencers or streamers or others. Third, testing out your game as both a product and also your chosen marketing strategy for that game early will pay dividends. You don't want to wait till just before ship to discover one or the other is ineffective. The old playbook just doesn't work that well anymore. Fourth, many of the breakout successes we see today are actually the result of a developer, big or small, building other games over the course of years or decades. Unfortunately, few studios are configured or funded for that type of eventual success, instead banking everything into one giant shot. Fifth, be careful about falling in love with your plan. The plan can lead you to a dead end really fast if you don't contact reality, don't listen to players, or just don't pay attention to how the world is changing. Especially as a smaller studio, take this advantage and be ready to pivot. 6. There's uncertainty baked into the world of games. You won't know if you'll make it until you ship. You can have an idea, you can take your best guess, but especially for games that intend to last for years or longer as live services, you simply won't know. 7th, players already have many games from the last several decades that they are often perfectly happy to keep playing. Think of Fortnite, League of Legends, World of Warcraft, Warframe, etc. The market is crowded and only becoming more so. Don't kid yourself on this, regardless of where you're headed in game dev. This is going to be hard. That's it. Thanks for listening. Did you enjoy this episode? If you did and are looking for more conversations like this one, join the Building Better Games Discord community. It's for leaders and producers in game dev who are frustrated with solving the wrong problems and who want to share experiences and learn how to lead and build better games. Check out the show notes to join. I'll see you there.